next time I did it, I kind of like, I knew that I was going to feel things like that, but kind of was emotionally prepared for it. And it was much better. It was like at least 50% better. So your first, 4 to 10, 5 to 10 performances, each one is going to get way, way better just from doing it.
And welcome back to Confident Musicianing. Today we have a very, very, very special guest. We are speaking with Max Blair. Max Blair is the Associate Principal Oboist for the Pittsburgh Symphony. He has performed as guest principal oboist with the Cleveland Orchestra, the San Francisco, Baltimore, and Detroit Symphonies, and the Buffalo Philharmonic. He spent 2 seasons with the New World Symphony, and in 2019, Max Blair was the only woodwind player from the United States selected to compete in the Tchaikovsky competition, which is held once every 4 years in St. Petersburg, Russia. He has a master's and a bachelor from the Juilliard School and is a former adjunct professor of oboe at Duquesne University and maintains a private studio. Hi Max, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, let's start right in. So let's start by talking a little bit about Juilliard. I think a lot of our listeners, when they hear that you've gone to Juilliard, especially the ones who also want to go to Juilliard, will be like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. So let's talk about your audition experience. So what was your audition experience like when you first auditioned? And since now that you're a professional and many years later, looking back on your Juilliard audition, what would you have changed, or maybe what are some things that were good to keep the same? Like, what are your reflections on that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, auditioning for colleges is always a very intense process, and it feels like a life or death thing that's happening. I started preparing, auditions are usually in February and March, and I started preparing the previous June with the exact repertoire I was going to play. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty comfortable with everything I was playing. I performed it all several times in competitions beforehand. So I felt confident. There's always unexpected things that happen at auditions. So in my case, they were running way, way behind. So I was sitting out in the hallway waiting for like 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
After my time was supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. Waiting to play. And actually it ended up being kind of cool because there were, several other people also waiting, and we kind of formed a sense of camaraderie while we were just talking about where we came from and our hopes and expectations and things like that. Mm-hmm. The audition itself went really well. I walked out of the room feeling like I'd done the absolute best I could have, and like it was the best performance in my life up to that time.
Wow.
So in terms of things I would do differently, not much. It went pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. I love how that you mentioned doing competitions beforehand, especially when something goes well. I at least love to reflect and be like, okay, why did it go well and how can we repeat that? And I think, doing competitions, having that repertoire, like under your belt, but like in a way that you've been like, okay, I have performed this multiple times, doing mock auditions, doing recitals, all of that stuff can be so important. So it's great that you mentioned that. And I think that that's something that maybe our listeners can take from. And I mean, I definitely took from when I was auditioning for music school, just doing like recitals and competitions and mock auditions and as many as you possibly can so that you can be as prepared as possible. Now, many of our listeners are preparing for auditions, and some for university and conservatory or conservatoire auditions. Maybe not necessarily just talking about your Juilliard audition because that was something that went really well, but if you just go back and talk to your younger auditioning self, What are some things that you would want to let younger Max know? Or what are some pieces of advice, maybe like 3 pieces of advice, for students starting out auditioning for music school, not necessarily just in respect to your Juilliard audition, but maybe the other auditions that you did as well?
Sure. Well, yeah, just going back for a minute to the doing competitions ahead of time. You know, I grew up in Oregon, and we had solo and ensemble competitions every year, which I know that they don't have here in Pennsylvania. So I started oboe my freshman year of high school and did those competitions every year starting from when I was a freshman. So every year for, 3 times a year, I was playing a concerto from memory in a high-stakes situation. So already by the time I'd auditioned for colleges, I've had, at minimum 12 experiences of playing under pressure. And one thing that I learned and regretted about my students here in Pittsburgh is that there isn't that kind of structured competition schedule through the school system. So, especially my first batch of students, when they were auditioning for conservatories, it was like the first time they were ever even preparing a piece with piano.
Oh, wow.
So I just wanted to stress that it wasn't only the specific repertoire I was playing that year, but it was just developing performance experience in general throughout my time playing oboe. So for people who are, they're maybe a freshman or sophomore and they're thinking about wanting to go to music school, don't wait until you're a senior to start doing recitals. You have to make performance opportunities for yourself if there aren't those kind of structured opportunities wherever you are. So even if that's just doing a recital just for some friends and family in your house or whatever, a couple times a year, the more you can get comfortable with that, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think that is so important. I remember going back to when I was doing auditions. I had a recital with a friend, and we just did our audition repertoire. But I do remember thinking it would have been great if I was able to do more recitals before then. So I think wherever our listeners are coming from, however old you are, it's never too early. Or never too late to kind of just start performing for anyone and everyone who wants to listen.
Yes, especially early on. The learning curve of performing is steep early on. So your first performance, you might, I remember I started on saxophone, and I remember my first ever public performance, and I was just absolutely terrified, mouth totally dry, shaking, cold, it was awful. It's actually kind of a miracle that I even continued to do music because it was such an uncomfortable experience.
Yeah.
But then the very next time I did it, I kind of I knew that I was going to feel things like that, but kind of was emotionally prepared for it, and it was much better. It was at least 50% better. So your first, 5 to 10 performances, each one is going to get way, way better just from doing it. So you just don't want those first ones to be your college auditions.
Yes, yeah. Make sure you get the ones where you have the big learning curve out of the way before it really, really counts. Yeah.
Also because I remember the first piece that I played for those competitions I mentioned in high school was the Handel G minor sonata. And I remember trying to put it together with the piano. We had 8 rehearsals, and it was just I remember thinking that was so hard to put it together with piano, because you're just not used to it.
Yeah.
But then, at Juilliard, for example, you're assigned a pianist to play with you in your audition, and you have 1 half-hour rehearsal. So if you're not used to doing that, that could be a very stressful thing to deal with.
Yeah.
So there's just so many skills you need to develop, kind of get comfortable with in order to be successful. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. Especially with the piano, because I feel like the piano is something that you might not necessarily realize will be hard. But it can be very, very, very difficult. So
it's just something that you're not it's just a new skill. You know, you're used to hearing the rhythm as it exists in your own internal world, but having to line that up with another person can be a little jarring for the first time.
Yeah.
Same thing with pitch. You know, for a lot of young players, they tend to play quite sharp. So if you're not used to like matching the pitch of a piano, it can feel very jarring to like have to aim all the notes in like a totally different direction.
Yes.
So just there's just so many little things to get good at, you know.
Yeah. No. 100%. Yeah. I think it's extremely insightful for anyone who is about to go through auditions, because by the time this episode comes out, it will be time to start thinking about auditions for the people who will be auditioning this school year. So yeah, very, very much so. That's very insightful. Let's talk about your time in the Pittsburgh Symphony. Many of our listeners might be considering pursuing playing in an orchestra when they finish university. So if we kind of envision your 18-year-old self again, you were in youth orchestra. What are a few things about being in a professional orchestra that are different from being in a youth orchestra that maybe you hadn't realized, or maybe came as a surprise to you, as you know, maybe would have been a surprise to you when you were in youth orchestra?
Yeah, I mean, well, the biggest thing is just the amount of concerts that there are. You know, we have 2 or 3 concerts every weekend, different repertoire every week. Which, so compared to a youth orchestra where you rehearse one program for like 3 months and then do one concert of it, that's a huge change. And even when you're at conservatory, you know, you're only going to play like 2, maybe 3 orchestra cycles per semester. So that's the biggest transition. I was very happy to have had my time at New World, because it does operate on basically a professional schedule. You have concerts every week, and you don't different repertoire all the time. And that was a good experience as like a transition for me. And for oboists, the biggest thing, or the biggest part of that, is keeping up with the reads. I mean, there's a big difference from going from, you know, you have to have a read for your lesson once a week and for one rehearsal a week versus and you're like expected to sound good every day and consistent, and that's so, for oboe players especially, that's the biggest difference, is just having your day-to-day read be at a professional level. Whereas I remember, you know, I started playing on my own reads from the end of my junior year of high school, but I was not in a position to have, you know, a good enough read every weekend. I remember thinking every time the youth orchestra had a concert, like, you know, I was like saving a read for a couple weeks, and it was like my miracle read of the month, and like that was my one that I was saving. Now you just can't do that. I mean, you have to be able to sound the way you're going to sound in the concert in every rehearsal, and there's 2 or 3 concerts every weekend. So just keeping up with that is, I think, as an oboe player, the biggest challenge. Yeah,
no, 100%. That's really interesting, because definitely youth orchestra is not as fast as professional orchestra, and kind of keeping up with that, you know, actually that's something that I didn't think about. I mean, so that's really, really insightful, especially from an oboist point of view, because reeds can be either our best friends or our worst enemies, and there's no way of telling which way it's gonna go. Yeah.
The other thing is that, you know, when you're in a professional orchestra, you have a particular position. Like, I'm associate principal, so I play principal oboe. Sometimes I play third oboe if it's a D or 4 oboe, but the vast majority of the time I'm playing principal. The person who's second oboe or second flute or whatever, they only play second oboe or second flute. And so I think people get into more, like, you refine that particular skill set. Like, to me, having to play second oboe on something would be really terrifying, because it's just a totally different set of skills. You have to make the reads differently. It's a totally different mindset. So I think compared to youth orchestra, where there's a lot of rotation, and maybe that, you know, maybe the situation is that you have to play second oboe on the first piece, and then the second piece is something with a huge oboe solo, and you have to just switch and be ready to go play principal on that. You know, that at least doesn't happen in professional orchestras. You kind of get a little more specialized.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's I guess probably a relief to you, especially when you're making your own reads. But yeah, I mean, personally, I feel like having those switching around in youth orchestra can be so helpful and so good because, everyone gets, I mean, it's about experience, so everyone gets the experience that they want. But then when it comes to professional, it's a bit more focused, and it's a bit more like, okay, you're doing this, and that's kind of what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, which can be definitely a relief in terms of oboists and making reads. When I was doing research for this episode, I saw that you competed in the Tchaikovsky competition in 2019. That is a really prestigious competition and a very impressive achievement. I watched the video, because there's a video online of the performance, and I watched it, and it was like mind-blowing. Like, I was like very excited. I'm very inspired afterwards. And we can also, if anyone wants to go check that out, we will be putting that in the show notes as well, so make sure you go check that out. But that, I mean, it was very cool. So what was your preparation for that competition when you were nearing it? So maybe not when you were first, like, getting familiar with the pieces, but maybe, like, 2 or 3 weeks before the competition.
Sure. Yeah, that was, so the Tchaikovsky competition traditionally has been just strings and piano. So that year was actually the first year they had woodwind.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I think it was possibly that was the reason that it was quite disorganized. So, like, we only found out who was invited to come play in the live rounds like a month beforehand.
Oh, wow.
So I only started learning the music like literally like 4 weeks before.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit crammed, I would say, like, but I enjoy that. I mean, I think I tend to thrive under those kind of situations. Like, as associate, I also have to step in if the principal has something come up, and sometimes I have to play things at the last minute. And I always really enjoy those kind of sort of high-stakes situations, so maybe it was well-suited to me.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I mean, I kind of knocked out the initial preparation, learning the music and deciding my interpretations and all that kind of in the first week, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And
then the next couple weeks was more about just doing a lot of run-throughs, like, because I did, I had memorized most of the repertoire for it. So just making sure I could comfortably do it from memory. Endurance is a big issue for oboe in a recital setting. So what I usually do when I'm playing a recital is make sure I can play each piece back-to-back 3 times. So I'll play whatever piece and then play it again and then play it again. And I feel like if I can get through it that 3rd time, then I feel confident that I'll be able to get through it in a pressured situation.
Mm.
So a lot of run-throughs, a lot of running through in different acoustics. So I'd run through it at home, at the hall, in different rehearsal rooms at the hall, and also with different reads, sometimes with good reads, sometimes with bad reads, just trying to feel like whatever ends up happening at the competition, I'll be kind of prepared for.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was a little bit crazy because, like, we had a PSO concert, like, on Sunday matinee.
Yeah.
And then I had to, like, fly to Russia immediately after. So the concert ended, and I took an Uber from the hall to the airport.
Wow.
And went directly to Russia. And anyway, the flight, it was like Pittsburgh to Chicago to Warsaw, and then Warsaw to St. Petersburg. Okay. And one of the legs was delayed, and my bag ended up not arriving in St. Petersburg. And that is important because they had my reed equipment in there, and my usual strategy when I travel is that I bring, like, almost finished reeds and then finish them there just to make sure that they're not going to change based on the elevation or whatever.
Mm.
So I had all these unfinished reeds and no reed equipment to be able to finish them.
Oh, no.
So, like, on the first day I got there, I told the organizers about that. And they were like, shuttling me all over St. Petersburg to like the various professional oboe players, like seeing if they had equipment I could use. And I was so jet lagged, I hadn't slept in like 30 hours, and it was just a nightmare. And then they were like trying to take me sightseeing and stuff, and I was like, I really just want to go back to the hotel.
Yeah.
That was crazy. And then we drew numbers for the order, and I thought, okay, you know, it was like 48 people, 12 for each woodwind instrument. So I thought, if I draw a late number, then, you know, I'll have enough days to get my bag and then finish my reeds before I have to play. But of course I drew number 3, so I was supposed to play on the first day, like the very next day. And the organizers were very gracious, and after some discussion, they did move me, so I played. Actually, I was the very last person to play.
Okay.
So anyway, it was a very strange situation.
Yeah. I mean, your adrenaline must have been like really high at that point.
It was more like dread. It was like, there's just no way at this point this is going to go well.
Yeah.
Because you're so thrown off. But anyway, it was fun anyway. I mean, I've always kind of preferred like solo playing, like in a recital setting, compared to everything else I do for chamber music and orchestra. So I try to just enjoy it and take it for what it was. Yeah,
no, 100%. That is definitely an experience. And I think that it goes to show that, like, I mean, I watched your program, and it was very, very impressive. So I think that goes to show that kind of, even if in the background things might be going crazy, people, like, we can still play well, or as best we can in the moment, and make it work.
It's also a responsibility as performers not to show that stuff to the audience. Like, even if you're feeling terrible about how you're playing, or you're whatever, any other thing, like, you have to present to the audience like everything's fine, and like you're enjoying yourself and you love this music, because that's a big part of, you know, the communicative art. So the audience will pick up on those kind of things, and it will inhibit their ability to access what you're trying to say with the music. Yeah. So that's a big thing too. Yeah, that's really important, I think. I feel like a lot of times, I mean, in my experience, when I do auditions, I've gotten a lot of comments from people saying, you seem very confident. Like, why? Like, I remember, like, I don't know, and it's I find it strange, but people will come up to me and be like, you seem so chill. Like, you seem so confident. How are you so confident? And I mean, other than I have like a small temptation to be like, well, here's a podcast about it, but but I think it's because, you know, I've worked on kind of putting, I mean, inside I might be very stressed, but kind of focusing on like presenting. I feel like, you know, when you get there, even if you're not playing, you're still in performance mode. Like, you're still like, even waiting outside, or talking to, you know, if you're talking to especially like one of the judges or one of the people who put it together, you are very much in performance mode, and it's not just about the playing, because, you know, people, it's an awful thing, but people make judgments about you even before they hear, you know, your first note. So yeah, that's really important to touch on, because the whole thing is performance. Yeah, it also affects your own mindset. I had a really interesting experience around this. The first summer I went to Verbier, which is a summer festival in Switzerland. I went for the first time when I was 20, and the average age there is like 26, maybe. Okay. So I was like one of the younger people, and just a lot of other stuff happened, like leading up to it. Like, I missed my flight to Europe. There's a lot of external things. Anyway, I got there, and I was just not feeling good about the situation, and that kind of endured for the first few weeks of the festival, and I was kind of struggling, and then, you know, eventually I was playing principal on the first act of Default Juilliard with Gergiev conducting, And there's in that first act, there's a lot of touchy woodwind moments where there's intonation things and soft attacks and oboe solos and I don't know. Gergiev said in addressing those passages, it wasn't specifically directed at me, but it was really important for me to hear at that time. It was like, the first thing you need to do is just play. Like, just play out and play confidently, even if you don't feel like it. Mm-hmm. And if it's too loud or if it's out of tune or whatever, we'll address that. And it doesn't have to be, a personal slight against you as a person. It's just, we'll just work on it.
Yeah.
And so I just took from that, like, exactly what we're talking about, where even if you don't feel it, you have to play confidently and then fix whatever issues may come up. But your first offering needs to be one of, sort of extroverted confidence and just forthright playing, and then deal with the details later. And that was really a turning point for me as an orchestral player. Like, when I got back to school the following year, my playing in orchestra was, like, much better and totally different. Just, more, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Grounded, more confident, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think, if you can kind of trick your mind into feeling confident through just doing the motions and then your brain follows, that can definitely be a hack for feeling confident, 100%. Max Blair, what does an effective practice session look like to you?
So that's a good question. So a lot of my practicing these days takes place while I'm making reads. So I'll be working on a read, and that is like close to something I would play in orchestra. So I'll take 15 or 20 minutes and play stuff on it to practice. Mm-hmm. It's rare that I have like a sit down and practice session these days.
Okay.
Mostly only I do that if I have like a recital or something coming up. So I guess different kinds of practice sessions. So if I'm learning a new solo piece, I have the kind of practice session where I'm making my interpretation of the piece. I go through and I mark in my breath. Mm-hmm. I change articulations or decide articulations if that's appropriate for the piece, decide dynamics, figure out phrasing, all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoy that kind of practice session where you're really like making your decisions. Mm-hmm. And then another kind is more of like I was talking about before, just kind of a run through. So once you've, made your decisions about the piece, then I just run through it a lot in different kind of situations, sometimes back to back or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then for orchestra, I have a lot of, depending on, again, what the piece is, if it's something I haven't played before, like, for example, we just did the Tchaikovsky Manfred Symphony, which I had never played and didn't know at all. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'll do some, just listening to the recording and following along with my part or the score, and I consider that a kind of practice session. If it's something awkward to put together, like rhythmically, sometimes I'll play along with the recording. That helps me like get a feel for what it's going to be like in the orchestra and who to listen to, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think what we can kind of gather from that is that there are multiple different types of practice sessions, and it's okay to have different types of practice sessions. I feel like, at least in my experience, if I, have a practice session where it's not exactly like all of the other ones in terms of like, it's this, like it's an hour, or it is this and I do this, that, and the other just like I did yesterday, I kind of feel like it's not good. But I think in that situation, we need to kind of realize, okay, there are different types of practice sessions. If you have a practice session where you're just focusing on playing, then that's great. If you have one where you sit down for 15 minutes because a reed needs to be adjusted, that's fine too. Like, I think kind of just, I guess, giving ourselves grace in terms of being like, okay, things will look different from day to day.
A little bit, yeah. It's a fine line. I will say when I was still a student, especially at Juilliard, mm-hmm. I was very structured about my practicing. So what I would usually do would be have 3 practice sessions in the day. Mm-hmm. The first one would be, early morning, like right after I wake up, and it'd be an hour of just fundamentals exercises, scales, long tones, work with a tuner, work on double tonguing or vibrato, things like that. My next practice session would be, etudes or orchestral repertoire or whatever we had coming up in oboe class, those kind of things. And then my third practice session would be like solo repertoire or more like fun things that I wanted to play. And that did evolve a bit. Like, I started taking professional auditions when I was a third year undergrad at Juilliard. So once I started doing more of those, then the practice sessions became more geared toward excerpts and things like that. But for young musicians, definitely I would say my current model of practicing is not what they should do. Definitely should be more structured with a big focus on fundamentals. Learning pieces is just really not that important. It's more about developing your fundamental skills on the instrument, and we can use pieces to kind of address those things or like figure out what we need to work on. And of course, the ultimate goal is to play pieces, play real music, and we do want to have fun playing instruments, so you want to play pieces. But for people who are really serious, it's going to be mostly about just commitment to a structured routine of fundamentals and sticking with that regardless of whether or not you feel like it, and kind of taking a more long-term approach.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really interesting, especially with the contrast between like maybe a professional's practice session versus someone who is younger. So just to kind of recap, focusing on fundamentals, and by that you mean, just so that we can make sure we're all on the same page, you mean like scales and arpeggios and long tones and vibrato and tonguing, all that, right?
Yeah, I guess like fundamentals, those would be like the things you do to address fundamentals, but what fundamentals are tone production, quality of sound, intonation, technical facility, vibrato, articulation. Those are like the fundamental abilities. And the things you mentioned are the exercises we use to develop those skills.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. That's really insightful, because I feel like a lot of us, especially younger musicians, can maybe go through the motions without actually putting our head into it. And that isn't as effective. So I guess something that we can pull from this is an effective practice session looks like you are kind of always analyzing things and kind of doing exercises for a goal. To get better for that. So
doing things by rote. I mean, I would say there's some room for doing things by rote, like scale exercises, things like that. I mean, obviously the 100% most ideal practice session is going to be mindful, always asking yourself questions, always consciously doing it. But there is a certain amount of work, especially I think of like double tonguing, where you just kind of have to develop the muscle involved, where it is kind of just rote, like just go for the next 20 minutes and let the muscle develop. But you're right that the best type of practicing is not going through the motions. It's using these exercises as exploratory tools to figure out how to play an instrument, basically.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so that is really, really helpful. I know that this next topic is a little bit kind of similar to this one, but kind of expanding on this one. You have experience with coaching younger musicians from your work at Duquesne University and also your private studio. In your experience, what is, maybe other than fundamentals, because we have talked about that, but what is one thing that you think younger musicians and music students should be working on more at this stage of their journeys?
Sure. The first thing I would say, which is not exactly answering this question, but the first thing would be making sure that this is really something they want to do.
Okay.
Like, people maybe have different degrees of knowledge about it, but it's just unbelievably competitive to get a job in this field. And for most people going to a conservatory, you're going to take out a lot of student loans, and there's just absolutely no guarantee of employment afterwards. So I'd say like the first step before even asking the question of like what to be working on is do I love this so much that I'm willing to kind of basically risk everything for it? There's nothing else I could possibly do, and I also believe I can do it. You know, like, it needs to start from that conviction, I'd say.
Yeah.
Because even people, you know, I have friends who were at Juilliard with me, and, you know, they're graduating from, like, the top music school in the country, and they still haven't won a position in a professional orchestra. And it's not because they're not great players, it's because there's just so few positions. And more, the level of playing is just higher and higher. So that would be step one, I think, that I'd want to stress to anybody, is, like really think about this and make sure it's what you want to do, because it's not easy and there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
The next thing I would say that students don't do enough of is developing their concept of playing. So before doing anything, I mean, not before doing anything on the instrument, but simultaneously with developing your skills on the instrument, is thinking about how you want to sound, what you want to do on the instrument. So, like, I see a lot of players not doing enough listening, not listening to enough variety of players, not going to concerts and getting inspired and, like, hearing things that they want to incorporate in their own playing. That would be one very big thing. And the other thing is kind of, especially now, this was difficult when I was a student because, you know, social media wasn't as ubiquitous and it wasn't really possible to do, but keeping up with your peers, like listening to recordings of people around your age that they maybe have posted online, and trying to see where the general level is at, and assessing, you know, am I keeping up with this level? Am I much lower? Am I much better? You know, that was something when I auditioned for conservatories, I had absolutely no idea if I was going to be laughed out of the room as a joke or if I was going to pursue it. Anywhere in between, I had no idea. These days, I think it's much more possible to kind of figure out where you stack up.
Yeah.
And another good way of doing that is to apply for summer programs. For example, like UTI, Boston University's Englewood Institute. You could apply to something like that, see if you get in. That's already a good indicator. And then when you're there, see what the level is like of other players. Because those things just kind of guide some of your decisions, and also, like, guide what you should be working on. So if you realize that everyone else can, whatever, articulate much faster than you, then you realize, okay, articulation is a weakness of mine, but I think my sound is way better than them. So then, you know, you kind of know, like, the size in your practice that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, especially, like, going to festivals, and I think as well, like, youth orchestra, kind of seeing whether, like how you fare compared to other people. I think when we talk about social media, I think social media is a really, really, really helpful tool for hearing what people around you and people your age are playing. I think as someone who does post on social media and who does post like, you know, practice videos and performance videos, I think something that is good to kind of just remind ourselves, because I have been kind of a victim of this in terms of comparing ourselves too much, because social media, like, we only share the good things, right? And as someone who does share stuff on social media, like, I do share sometimes mistakes, especially if they're funny, but most of the things, you know, most of the like the, you know, in the practice session struggling stuff, I don't necessarily share, and I know that a lot of other people who share stuff on social media don't necessarily share either. So I think looking on social media and doing that is a great idea, but I think as well, just to kind of counterbalance that and be like, okay, you know, these people are doing these amazing things, but, you know, and maybe I need to, like, do this, or maybe this is good, or whatever it is, but also understand that those same people are getting frustrated and making mistakes in the practice room, and because the people who are good tend to work on stuff that they're not so good at in the practice room. So it's not all, like, you know, everyone just sounds great. And I think that I mean, I think,
I would assume I would assume that what people are posting, like, that's their best day this month.
Yeah.
I think as long as you approach it with that kind of mindset, like, they're not sounding like that every day.
Yeah.
Then it can be healthy, yeah.
Yes, no, but I think, I mean, I have been someone who has, had to maybe take a break from looking at other people on social media because I compare myself, and it's not necessarily, like, fair comparing, right? It's like, okay, I'm comparing their best day with the practice session that I just had that I really struggled through. So I think that, having that.
It can go both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at some point, if that keeps happening, one has to ask oneself, okay, maybe I really am not keeping up with these people.
Yeah.
But also, you have to have the perspective that, yes, this is probably this person's best. They're posting it because they think it sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And then, listen based on, like, maybe don't listen to that right after you just had a bad practice session or something.
Exactly. Kind of thinking of it.
Yeah, one thing that's difficult and that I wish I did better when I was younger was really listening objectively. Like, I would hear people that I thought, especially this happened more like once I got into college age and summer festivals and stuff, and I'd hear people that were objectively better than me, and I would get really, like, jealous, and I found myself, like, trying to convince myself that, oh, actually I'm better, but just blah, 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 X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
What I wish I had done was look more objectively and said, okay, they are better. What are they doing better that I want to incorporate into my playing?
Mm-hmm.
How are they doing that? Like, are they better at everything across the board, or is it just one particular skill? But what's not helpful is to just kind of construct this illusion for yourself that, oh, well, it's just their best playing and it's not a fair comparison and blah, blah. I mean, there is some element of that that's healthy, but it's also, can become a little bit of a coping mechanism. So I think what I wish I had done better was have just a more, like, less emotional, bit more objective kind of perspective when looking at my peers and their playing level.
100%. This actually goes back to, I'm pretty sure it was like either episode 3 or episode 4 of the podcast. So, like, way at the beginning, I was talking about, listening objectively rather than emotionally, and that's actually something that Professor Titus Underwood, who teaches at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory, told me about. And I think, listening objectively rather than emotionally is so, so, so important, because then we can kind of start to get not only kind of critical about it, but also a little bit inspired. And I think that can really be a good motivator of, like, okay, this person sounds really good, maybe their tone is great or their articulation is great. I can't wait to get into the practice session or the practice room and really, start working on that. So yeah, no, that's really, really, really cool to touch on.
Yeah, and I think that it takes a lot of maturity and a lot of, fortitude as a person, because it's easy to look at, like, for example, professional players. Like, I would go see performed as a Metropolitan Opera or Cleveland Orchestra and see my teachers play, and I'd be blown away by their playing, and I had no problem feeling inspired by that.
Mm-hmm.
But if I went to a Juilliard Orchestra concert and saw my classmate play something that sounded amazing, then the temptation not to be inspired, but to be kind of, like, uncomfortable was there. So, yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, our identities are tied up in how perceive our level at the thing that. So, yeah, it's challenging, but try to find that maturity and that strength and sort of resolve, I guess, to be able to acknowledge when something is good and better than yourself. That's not easy, but I think it's important.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's very, very, very important. I'm really glad that we touched on that and we chatted about that, because I think that's really important to touch on. Just kind of talking about, we're nearing the end of this episode. What do you have coming up, like, in terms of maybe your personal music stuff, or maybe with the Pittsburgh Symphony? What are some fun things that are coming up music-wise for you?
Oh, well, we've got 2 weeks left in our classical season at the PSO, so this week and next week. And then that's pretty much it for me playing-wise until our European tour at the end of August.
Ooh, where are you going?
So, we're going to Germany, Austria, and Italy.
Okay.
So PSO tours Europe pretty much every other year, sometimes 1.5 years, depending. And we pretty much always go to like Germany and Austria partially because our music director is Austrian, so he likes to go there. But also, the important festivals in Europe are in those countries, so we do always go there. And then usually one or two other countries are tacked onto that. So
yeah, that's very exciting, and I know that we do have listeners. I know 100% from Germany, and also from Austria and from Italy. So if you guys are in those countries and you want to go see Max perform, there will be a link in the show notes for that. That's very, very, very exciting, and I hope you have a great time on that tour. It sounds very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, they're fun. They're often stressful. It's like, a lot of times you get into the city at like 2 p.m. and then you have a concert that evening at 8 or whatever, and then you leave again the next day. So sometimes it's like bam, bam, bam.
Yeah.
There are some breaks built into the schedule here and there, but yeah, depending on what the repertoire is on any given tour, it can range from relaxing and enjoyable to unbelievably stressful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. That makes sense. Where can, if people want to find you online, or maybe like find your biography, or maybe some recordings of you online, where can people go for that?
Well, I don't have much of an online presence. I don't use any social media, so nothing there. But on the PSO website, my bio is there, and I'd be happy to give out my email if anyone wants to get in touch or whatever, if that would be useful.
If that's okay with you, we can definitely put that in the show notes.
Cool.
Yeah, no, 100%. All right. Well, unless there's anything else that you want to touch on, is there anything else you want to touch on?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, no, it was a very, very, very good conversation. That is about it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, all of the stuff to do with this episode will be in the show notes, from the blog post that goes with this episode to all of the links that we discussed about. Do yourself a favor and check those show notes, because let's be honest, there's some good stuff in there. And if you want to show your love and support for the Confident Musicianing podcast, make sure you give it a follow. Max, thank you so much for coming on. It was amazing chatting with you.
My pleasure. Thanks.